Ho, 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 Riley's.
No, but you got to make it a little more,
Santa-like?
No, like scratchy.
Okay. Ho, 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 Riley's.
Yeah, that was great.
So what we're doing there, if you didn't put two and two together, is it's the holiday season. So we got a little Santa Claus, ho, ho, ho. And then, of course, we went right back to O'Reilly's, where we like to end up at all times. Today, we have a very, very interesting guest on. I fell in love with his verbiage on Sam Harris's podcast. So did Monica.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Haidt.
It was really the first time we say that about Serial too, but we really bonded over his episode of Sam Harris.
Well, and in fact, he was our introduction to Sam Harris.
Yes.
That was the very first episode of Waking Up that I listened to per Jedediah Jenkins' suggestion.
Yep.
Who you guys are going to meet, Jedediah Jenkins. Very special friend of ours.
Mm-hmm. We don't need to tease that yet.
No, not that.
Oh, just in general?
He'll be in here.
Yeah.
He's a very interesting guy, and he seems to have his finger on the pulse of all things intellectually stimulating. A lot of things I've found my way to have come through Jedediah. So anyways, he steered us to Jonathan Haidt and Sam Harris arguing ostensibly,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a very fascinating debate. We both kind of fell in love with Jonathan, so it's very exciting for us to have him on the podcast today. Jonathan is an American moral psychologist and professor of ethical leadership at New York University's Stern School of Business. He's a smarty pants, and he gets into it. Jonathan's written several books: Flourishing, The Positive Psychology, and The Life Well Lived. He's also written The Happiness Hypothesis, The Righteous Mind, and he is here currently promoting the book, The Coddling of the American Mind. So please enjoy Jonathan Haidt.
He's an armchair expert. He's an armchair expert.
I use your name often. This may shock you or hopefully flatter you, but I am quoting you pretty regularly at dinner parties and stuff. And every time I get to your last name, just panic sets in.
It's Haidt. I'm tall. I'm not full of hatred.
It's Haidt.
Haidt.
I'm a dyslexic, and it's scary. Everything. So Jonathan Haidt is here, and I just want to set you up by saying Monica and I, who talk a lot about Sam Harris's podcast, the reason I even discovered his podcast was someone told me you have to listen to this episode, and it was your first appearance on his show.
Oh, excellent.
Where you guys attempt to bury a hatchet or figure out what
we succeeded.
Yeah. I shouldn't say attempt. But it was such a thrilling conversation. I recommend everybody listen to that. There were moments where I was driving and I thought, oh, just hang on, keep up. Because when you guys kind of start arguing about whether or not there's morals that would apply intergalactically,
Yeah.
and whether an animal would procreate asexually, what that would do to individualism, all these things, it was mental candy times 10. Just what a delicious interview that was. And it turned me on to Sam.
Something more like nuts. Like, why candy? I don't want it to be candy. I want it to be like a protein bar.
Oh, you want it to be a
healthy.
healthy
Yeah,
snack.
yeah.
Oh, you're right.
Nutritive.
Yes. It was a very low carbohydrate, high protein shake, but plant based.
Smoothie.
So, yeah, of course.
Pea protein. It was the pea protein of debates. But I have then since seen your TED Talk. I've read much of Righteous Mind. You've written also The Happiness Hypothesis. Righteous Mind made it onto the New York Times bestseller list. You have a PhD in psychology, and you are currently a professor in ethical leadership at NYU's Stern School of Business. And you just have the most incredible take on so many things we care about on the show, and it comes up a lot. So you have written a new book called The Coddling of the American Mind, and you wrote it with Greg
Lukianoff.
Another scary name for me. Tell me quickly what it was about this topic that drew you to it.
So I taught for 17 years at the University of Virginia. I loved teaching. Students were great. I moved to NYU in 2011 to the business school. I didn't know anything about business at the time. I was really just studying moral and political psychology, but I had the great fortune to land a one-year temporary position at NYU Stern when my last book, When the Righteous Mind, was coming out, and I loved it there. They offered me a job. And while I was teaching, just some weird stuff started happening in my teaching, students taking offense to things that seemed completely inoffensive. And At the same time, we started hearing the first, this is 2014, the first article started coming out about trigger warnings and safe spaces. These are terms, I mean, we all heard of safe spaces like in Srebrenica in Bosnia in the 90s, but the idea that a classroom should be a safe space, safe from critique or criticism, these were new and strange ideas. And Greg Lukianoff, who is the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Entertainment. My God, here I am in Hollywood.
Yeah, you're infected. We got you already.
So quick.
The Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. I'd met him through a mutual friend at a party, and he invited me to lunch to share an idea that he'd had. Here he was for 14 years, he'd been fighting for free speech rights on campus, and that mostly meant pushing back against administrators who kept trying to restrict students' free speech rights in order to protect themselves at the university from lawsuits, from bad publicity. And the students generally want free speech. The students don't want to be told what they can and can't say. But suddenly in 2013, 2014, Greg started noticing that students were asking for protection from words. They were saying, if this speaker comes to campus, it'll be traumatizing. Somebody has to block this speaker. We can't have this go forward. And students were asking for trigger warnings applied to certain books. You can't just teach Greek myths. There are myths that involve rape, and you can't tell a story about rape in a classroom. What if this traumatizes someone or re-traumatizes them? And so this was brand new. And Greg's idea was that students were using the exact cognitive distortions that he had learned not to do in learning cognitive behavioral therapy. So Greg is prone to depression. And he had a horrible depression in 2007. And he credits learning CBT the next year with saving his life. And in CBT, for those listeners who don't know, it's a technique of cleaning up your thinking, because we all do this stupid stuff. We all do catastrophizing. Oh no, I'm late for the interview. And no, now they're going to hate me and they're not going to give me the job. And then I'm going to die poor and alone, So we all do catastrophizing, discounting the positives, like, there's good and bad things, but we only focus on the bad, mind reading, labeling. We do all these distortions. Some people do them a lot. Most of us do them occasionally.
And it's often just biochemically driven, right? You're lacking enough serotonin or dopamine to keep you focused on the gratitude list.
Well, I would never say that some psychological thing is just explained by a biological imbalance. But what I would say is it is clear that when the mind is in a depressed state, when the mind is more focused on threats and it's low energy and all the symptoms and feelings of being depressed, then it's much more prone to do this disordered thinking. And the amazing discovery that Aaron Beck made, he's one of the founders of cognitive therapy at the University of Pennsylvania in the 1960s. One of the amazing discoveries he made is that while depressed people think this way all the time, if you can even briefly get them to stop doing that, if you can briefly get them to question their catastrophizing assumptions, they get a moment of relief. And maybe just for a few minutes, but suddenly things feel less gloomy, more hopeful. And in those few minutes, then you can talk about other things. And so Beck's discovery was that it's a two-way street between the depressed state and the disordered thinking. And if you clean up the thinking, you cure the depression. That was the amazing discovery. And this was back in the heyday of Freudianism. So in the 1960s, everyone thought, well, if someone's depressed, it must be because they wanted to sleep with their mother and kill their father, or whatever, some unresolved Oedipal conflict. And what Beck showed is that all you have to do is change the thinking and you can solve the depression. And that works for anxiety, it works for eating disorders, it works for a broad variety of psychological problems. So Greg was a big fan. He'd read my book, The Happiness Hypothesis, where I talked about CBT. So he wanted to talk to me about his idea that somehow or other, universities seem to be teaching cognitive distortions to students, and they were therefore demanding protections from books. Can you imagine college students saying, don't expose me to a book or a speaker? This was brand new. The millennials were not like this. This is a very important point. People think, oh, those millennials on college campuses, they're coddled and snowflake. No, first of all, it's not millennials. The millennials are fine. It begins with birth year 1995. It's students who are born in 1995 and after. There's a sharp generational shift, and we'll talk about that later, why that is. But when they show up on college campuses around 2013, 2014, that's when all these new ideas come in.
You also make a distinction, which is useful just because people will be screaming it until we acknowledge it, that say certain publications have pointed out that this isn't a ubiquitous situation. This is actually affecting primarily universities, elite universities on the coast and whatnot, right? So that's right.
Yeah. So we're in the middle of an age of moral panic. That is, we're in a culture war. There's left-wing media and right-wing media, and each side really wins by putting forth a catastrophizing diagnosis. The right is Nazis and they're going to take over. Now the left is, commie, whatever it is these days. So the right, the left is snowflake students who, can't stand free speech. And the reality is that there are problems all over the place, but neither panic is correct. And so there are big changes on college campuses in the dynamics around speech. But there are 4,500 college campuses in this country. Most of them are non-selective, non-residential. On most of them, nothing is happening. If you map out where the shout downs, the really dramatic stuff is happening, it's mostly at elite schools in the Northeast and along the coastal strip of the West Coast. So you had a few events here at Claremont McKenna in Los Angeles, Berkeley, at Evergreen up near Seattle. I think some of your listeners will be very familiar with these stories. Others will be like, what? What are they talking about?
Well, that's what's relevant. Unless you follow this stuff, unless you've seen some of these, like at Evergreen or some of these different times it's happened and been caught on video, if you don't see it, it's hard to imagine, especially if you went to college like I did and graduated in 2000. I didn't witness anything like that. I could have never imagined that this would be happening.
That's right. If you graduated before in 2012 or earlier, then you didn't see any of this. None of this stuff was on campus. You probably never heard microaggressions, safe space, trigger warnings, bias response teams. Walk you through one case. This, I think, it's a really revealing one. It's an interesting one. So there was a student, we changed her name. We call her Olivia in the book.
Could you call her Dax in this telling of it?
Believe me, you don't want to. But let me make clear. So this is The Coddling of the American Mind. But really, Greg and I don't like the title that was made up for us. We love this. We got to make up the subtitle. The subtitle is How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. That's what the book is about. All right. So there was a Latina student. Her parents had emigrated from Mexico. She was born in California. And she wrote an essay in a student publication. She wrote an essay about how marginalized she feels. She doesn't fit in. She says, our campus climate and institutional culture are primarily grounded in Western white, cis heteronormative, upper to upper middle class values. So she's having a bad time at Claremont McKenna. She feels she doesn't fit in. The dean of students, a woman named Mary Spellman, reads the article online and then writes a private email to her. And I'll read you the entire text of Spellman's email. Olivia, thank you for writing and sharing this article with me. We have a lot to do as a college and community. Would you be willing to talk with me sometime about these issues? They are important to me and the Dean of Students staff, and we're working on how we can better serve students, especially those who don't fit our CMC mold. I would love to talk with you more. Best, Dean Spellman. Well, as you'd imagine, the campus erupted in protest. The woman who got this email, she put it up on her Facebook page.
I wouldn't imagine.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I'm setting this up rhetorically.
Okay, good.
So the woman who, Olivia, posted it on her Facebook page and said, and here's the kicker, she says, I guess I just don't fit that CMC mold. Feel free to share. And so people shared it. They were outraged that the dean would suggest that she didn't fit in, that she didn't belong. Mm-hmm. Now, so the entire controversy was over the use of the word mold.
One single word.
That's right. And it's clear from the context that because Olivia had said, I don't fit this white, hetero, cis, normative, I don't fit this mold is what she basically said. And so Dean Spellman is clearly empathizing with her. She's trying to say, yes, we're trying to help students who feel they don't fit in. In the new call-out culture that burst onto the scene because of social media, so it was really, by 2014, 2015, it was really intense at some places. Olivia was in a call-out culture, and she could get stated. Well, this is our analysis. Of course, we don't know what was going on in her mind. But the way a call-out culture works is if you can find some way to say that somebody else is racist, sexist, cis heteronormative, marginalizing, you call them out. Mm-hmm. And then you get credit for calling out that kind of bigotry. And so there were protests. Some students went on hunger strike until. And
you get elevated, right? If you're someone who has pointed out, someone who's infringed on these rules, then your prestige, right, exactly. You get something from it. You get a cultural capital from it.
Exactly. That's right. And that's the key to this whole thing. Olivia's not a bad person, but she's a young woman in a prestige economy, as it were, in a social culture in which you get points, you get status, people look up to you if you get these points. And she was playing the game as she found it. At least that's our analysis of it. So ultimately, of course, the university couldn't possibly fire Spellman. I mean, it was clear she'd done nothing wrong. She was trying to be helpful. So the university couldn't fire her, but they did nothing to defend her. With students going on hunger strike, we will not eat until she's fired.
Well, and point out, because I've heard you talk about this before, but a new element in this is also there's a pattern, which is call out, but then also state some demands.
Right.
So sensitivity training.
It's always diversity training. You must always demand diversity training.
And then ultimately, someone must be fired for this transgression. Yeah?
Right. Well, that's right. Because you can't, what's most psychologically satisfying is to burn them to death at a stake. That's what
It feels good, yeah.
Well, that's really what we want to do.
Yeah. There's some finality and some closure to that.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's right. No, the two traditional punishments are banishment. You have to get them out of your community, and then they're dead to everybody. Or burning by fire. So shooting with a gun isn't satisfying. Finding them isn't satisfying. You want them to either disappear or burn to a crisp. And fortunately, there's been almost no actual violence. That's important to say. But yes, there is a kind of an auto-da-fe quality. These sorts of moral panics, these sorts of witch trials, basically, crop up throughout history. And that's part of our analysis in Chapter 6. We come back to this episode and we say it's the psychology of a witch trial.
Yes, and I don't want to derail your momentum, but I want to say what's scary to me is that under this kind of paradigm, there's zero room for anyone to acknowledge that they've erred, correct their behavior, get redemption.
No, that's right. That's right. So I think it's very important to think about what game are we playing. In anything we do, where there's often a kind of an implicit game that we're playing. And so one game is the truth-seeking game. You can have a discussion and you're trying to figure something out together. And this is what we try to do in seminar classes especially. Another game that you might have is the war game. I hate you. I'm trying to defeat you. It's a contest and I would never grant that you're right about anything. My job is to humiliate you or defeat you. Another game that we might play is the let's help him game. Like there's some problem and we're going to cooperate in figuring out how to best help someone. So there's all kinds of games that we could be playing. And if you have goals of reforming an institution, let's say a college campus, because a lot of these protests are taking place, these issues are taking place on college campuses. If your goal is to solve a problem, you'd be open to all kinds of evidence. You'd be open to evidence about what works. You would not write people off forever. You'd be open to people making mistakes. But unfortunately, the game that is becoming dominant on many campuses is exactly this prestige economy where my goal is to call out sinners, and then it uses our deep and ancient religious psychology. We create something as sacred, and we all circle around this sacred thing. We're all very vigilantly looking for sinners. We're looking for sacrilege and blasphemy. I think you can't understand what's been going on college campuses since 2015 without the concept of blasphemy. People who say blasphemous things, who question diversity policies in particular, that is the most dangerous thing you can do on a college campus today. If you question diversity policies, question whether they work, question whether we should have this kind of training, you really run a risk of a very, very powerful reaction against you, which might demand that you be fired.
Yes, it can quite easily get you just labeled permanently as a racist.
Right.
But I think we should step back 4 steps and just, in a nutshell, explain, or at least why I think the world of academia has worked. The institution has some theories. It's always being refined. It's always open to critique. Everyone has an opportunity to voice a complaint, and then it just grows and evolves and gets better. Mm-hmm. But in a zero-sum win-lose game, as you point out, that's not the goal now. The goal isn't to help perfect the message.
Truth, it's to get victory. That's right. The key is what we might call institutionalized disconfirmation. That means we all have ideas, we all have hypotheses. A very well-known effect in psychology is called the confirmation bias. If I believe that eating oranges will cure my cold faster, which is what my mother always told me, that vitamin C will cure colds. So whenever I have a cold, I would take vitamin C. And lo and behold, the cold would go away. And therefore, I confirmed that it works.
Yeah.
Now, that's really stupid because, it turns out it actually doesn't make any difference. But I didn't seek disconfirmation. It's only if I tried to disconfirm it, like by saying, okay, this time I won't take vitamin C and let's see if it...
Actually measure how long it takes you.
Right.
Yeah.
So in any scientific community, and this goes back to the early days of the Enlightenment, when there were coffee shops at which men of science or men of, they would gather and they would put forth their ideas and someone would criticize them. That's the crucial thing.
Criticizing, yeah.
That's right.
It's imperative.
That's right. So we all have a confirmation bias. We all want to believe what we currently believe, and other people do us the favor of criticizing it.
This is one of my favorite things you talked about. Your explanation of confirmation bias is the one that resonated the most with me. And you just point out quite simply, we are almost incapable individually of being objective. Our brain is not wired to help us be objective, but that the beauty of systems and of groups is that systems can be objective,
Yep.
right?
That's right. That's what I really want people to keep their eye on as we go through this culture war, as our society is coming apart in a lot of ways. Our success is not based on how smart we are. It's based on how good our systems are. And the best systems are those that bring out what's great about human beings and that temper what's bad about us. So my second book, The Righteous Mind, I go deeply into our evolution, how we evolved as social creatures to paint our bodies, dance around a fire, worship rocks and trees. The sort of the proto-religious form, the early religious forms are very similar all around the world. And it's only fairly recently, only a few thousand years ago, that after agriculture, after large-scale societies, it's only then that we start to get large-scale religions and big gods. But religion is really, the natural form of it is much more animistic, small-scale, binding a group together with rituals. And I think this is important to keep in mind because certain systems take us out of that. Certain systems allow us to interact with strangers. They allow us to create these vast, open, secular societies that are diverse and that leave room for people to live lives they want. But the tribalism and the ancient religious psychology can come roaring back very quickly. We allow that to happen with sports in a controlled way. And that's fun. That's just great. That's just like fake tribalism.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I have a chapter in The Righteous Mind where I'm not a sports fan, but the couple times I went to a UVA football game, it was really thrilling. It was a real tribal thing. I love UVA. I love the community. And singing in unison, getting drunk together, cheering, exulting, lamenting when you lose. Those are tribal practices and they're deeply satisfying. Unfortunately, a lot of these tribal practices are coming back, not just in our political life where they've never really gone, but in many more aspects of our daily life. And we'll get into identity politics later. There are various forms of it. But to the extent that we're dividing up, we have a diverse society. To the extent that we're encouraging more divisions among people and more tribal identities, I think it's overall a bad thing.
Well, and yes, and so something I'm always on my soapbox about is that we seem to have a pretty broad understanding that our brains and our bodies evolved in an environment we no longer inhabit, and we seem to recognize that our brain has bad wiring for eating. We are encouraged to eat as many calories as humanly possible when it tastes good because at one time that served us quite well because food was scarce.
It has very good wiring for eating in the environment of evolutionary adaptation, the EEA.
Yes. And
we don't live there anymore.
We don't. As I say, my brain thinks that Snickers will only be in bloom this week and I should eat as many as I can.
I'm going to take that line. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So, but what I think people don't, so they've made that connection. They go, you know what, our biology is working against us at this moment where you can go to 7-Eleven at any time of day and eat too much food. And I think it's really, I call these vestigial, benefits that no longer help us. But I don't think people recognize the power of being a group animal. But now these things, we need to be aware of them at all time. Our tribalism, our in-group, out-group predilections, we have to monitor them as rigorously as we would monitor what we're eating. I want to ask you this because I floated this by my wife the other night and she hated it, but I do think I'm onto something, which is,
okay.
And let me first acknowledge that I am a white man. I have all the opportunity in the world. I have a ton of privilege that a lot of people don't have. I recognize that. I also recognize that the whole system is pretty much run by white men, and I don't deny the lopsidedness of the power structure. My fear, though, is that a lot of people think that if we remove the white male from these systems, that somehow the systems are going to work magically all of a sudden. And my argument to my wife was, the systems are inherently flawed. The power structure, when you put anyone in power like this, what you're really seeing is a bad outcome of anyone being entrusted with power. And if you could look at any ethnicity throughout history, when they were in power, they were still shitting on some other group. It's not unique to just the white male. So sure, let's definitely, without saying, let's get the diversity definitely proportional to the country as much as we can, but also recognize the outcome might not be what you think. The system itself might need some perfecting. I guess the example I was thinking of most explicitly when I was talking to her about it is, yes, most police forces could benefit from more diversity, but also Black cops in the Black community are disliked by the Black citizens. So the job itself, for whatever reason, by its current design or in practice, somehow that makes them assume the same thing they hated about the white cop. And there's still going to be a problem. We haven't addressed something else that's happening.
Okay, perfect. That is exactly the great insight of social psychology, that when you look around the world and you see bad things happening, if it's one person who does a terrible thing, maybe it's that person. But if it's a whole group of people who are doing something over and over again, it's probably something about the roles, institutions, and social structure of the situation. And this is the Stanley Milgram experiment, the classic experiment about would you shock someone to death if an experimenter tells you to. What Milgram found is that 2/3 of the people went all the way to the end of the experiment, and it didn't much matter about your personality. What mattered was little things he manipulated about the environment. If there was any disagreement among experimenters, then nobody went along. All sorts of little manipulations had a huge impact on behavior. So I think your point is that if you put people in the position of being a policeman, whether they're white or Black, they're still going to do some of the same things that lead to hatred of police.
Well, they're going to join a new in-group. And now the neighborhood's the out-group. And they're going to have their own little microcosm culture within there. And they're going to do all the things that any one of us primates would do as a social animal. So we need to look at those things, I guess, that's at the base of all this.
I completely agree. And this, we live in a time when we're choking on moral outrage. We have way too much moral outrage. And I think taking that kind of social psychological perspective in which you don't see a world full of good and evil people, rather you see complicated social situations that have some negative externalities. And obviously, and we've all seen the videos of Black men getting shot when they had their hands up or they were
terrible.
There's something wrong. Clearly there's something wrong. And so for students to be focused on the injustices of the criminal justice system, that's great. I mean, there are reasons to do that. But I think a problem is that they've taken that same mindset and they've applied it to universities and everywhere else where they find themselves. And often these are incredibly anti-racist, progressive institutions that are trying really, really hard to do what they can. And so to take this confrontational attitude into, as Olivia and her fellow students did at Claremont McKenna. Now, again, I don't know what there are all kinds of grievances. I can't judge too strongly because I wasn't there. I don't know what the exact grievances were. But from what we could find out, the grievances had nothing to do with Spellman. It's not as though she had said insensitive things and therefore they were targeting her. So at least we know that there was injustice in terms of them targeting this poor woman. And you can see her crying on the videos when you see the videos of her, the students circling her and airing their grievances.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, I like your social psychological approach.
Stay tuned for more Armchair Expert, if you dare.
Now, you said something in your TED Talk. You talk about, lack of moral diversity makes it hard to understand how our world works. Shared moral values create teams, and the psychology of teams shuts down open-minded thinking. So you're in a moral matrix, and you give the 5 foundations of morality that we are probably born with.
Yep.
And I think these are very, very relevant for us to unravel what's happening with the outrage and what's happening with all the topics you cover in this book. So can you just tell us quickly, could you walk us through the 5 foundations of morality?
Sure. So my research is on moral judgment, and I originally was looking at how it varies across cultures. And so I read very widely. I read religious texts. I read ethnographic books, profiles of non-Western cultures. And what I found is that there are a lot of common themes, but yet there are a lot of differences. So my work has been trying to figure out how can it be the case that morality is kind of universal in some ways, but also really variable. And the theory that I came up with, along with Craig Joseph and Jesse Graham, and working on some ideas from my postdoc supervisor, Richard Schwader, at the University of Chicago, was that just as we evolved, our tongues have 5 different receptors to pick up different properties of the world, chemical properties, for salt, sour, sweet, bitter, and umami, a kind of meat flavor. So we evolved so that we respond to the certain properties of things that are good for us nutritionally. In the same way, our brains, or I should say our minds, evolved to pick up certain properties of the social world that it behooves us to notice and care about. And so the 5 original foundations, there's more than 5, but the 5 that we started studying originally are care and harm issues, that's 1. Fairness versus cheating is 2. In-group loyalty versus betrayal is 3. Authority versus subversion is 4. And sanctity versus degradation is 5. We also think now there's liberty, liberty versus constraint. There may be some issues about property and ownership. There's all sorts of moral intuitions that human beings have.
But what's really fascinating about these 5 is that you chart these 5 concerns of morality on left and right, liberal and conservative, and you do it throughout several different countries. So not just ours. And what you find a pattern that emerges that conservatives seem to value 3 in particular, and liberals seem to value 2 in particular.
Well, it's close. It's slightly different than that. So the theory was originally constructed to study how cultures differ. Why is India? So in India, in traditional Hindu morality, issues of purity and pollution and sanctity are much more salient than they are in secular American culture. But while we were developing this around 2003, 2004, the American culture war was getting so bad, we began to apply this to left-right dimensions. And as soon as we started collecting data, as soon as we started doing surveys with large numbers of people, and listeners can go to yourmorals.org. If you go to yourmorals.org, register, you can take the Moral Foundations questionnaire, and you can find out your score on these 5 foundations. So immediately what we saw is that people on the left score very high on the Care Foundation and the Fairness Foundation. And people on the right score high on all the foundations. So it's not that people on the right really also, they value issues of care and fairness. Now, fairness is different on the left and the right. Fairness on the left is especially about equality. People on the left are very sensitive to inequality, including inequality of outcome. People on the right, when they say fairness, they mean proportionality. So do the crime, do the time. The karma, actually the Hindu concept of karma is actually a very conservative notion. If you do good, you should be rewarded, but if you do bad, you should be punished.
And then even within these principles, they manifest themselves differently within either side of the aisle, which is for the purity one, which I find very fascinating. I'm glad you pointed this out. For conservatives, the purity morality clause seems to center specifically on sexuality.
That's right.
And then for liberals, and I'm neck high in this in Hollywood, it's food. We like fetishize food and the purity of what we're putting in our bodies, and it has that same moral implication.
Exactly. That's right. So one of the key insights that I got from anthropology is that it's very commonly believed around the world that the body is a temple, or at least that the body has these properties that must be protected from contaminants and pollutants, and especially before you go to God. So before you pray. So it's very clear in Islam and Judaism, before you pray, before you go into the temple, you have to cleanse yourself. Menstruating women are often not allowed to approach sacred objects. So there's a logic to this. It's the logic of contagion or contamination. It's very deep in our minds. Most religions build on it. Protestantism, as Protestantism develops, they try to strip away a lot of that. Catholicism has more of the washing and the physical stuff. So it's always there in our minds, and some religions and some political systems build more on it. So as you say, at least in the American context, American conservatives were really heavily moralizing sexuality, homosexuality, birth control, birth, abortion. So
sodomy laws.
Exactly, that's right. That's the clearest example is sodomy laws. Whereas if you're on the left, you look at this and you say, okay, how are sodomy laws protecting people? How are they preventing harm? I mean, if people love other people, why can't they be together?
It's consensual.
It's consensual, yes. Yeah. So almost any culture war issue you want to look at, flag burning, sodomy laws, abortion, drugs, anything. If you understand these foundations, you can understand why the left takes one position and the right takes another.
Yes. And the reason I wanted you to bring that up is because I think it's so crucial that both sides first acknowledge the opposing point of view is themselves cemented in a foundation of morality. Everyone is really after a similar thing. And there's a lot of disagreement about what one's important or how to execute it or whatnot. Yeah. But first starting, again, to reject the notion of good and evil.
That's right. And what you just said is, I think, the key to living with some equanimity in our insane current political climate. So I spent the entire Reagan administration angry. I was always on the left, and I was just politically angry, from the day Reagan won until, I guess, the day Clinton won, 1992, 93. And I was very moralistic and judgmental. But as I studied moral psychology, and as I set for myself the task of understanding different political views, I found it really liberating. I found that it released me from anger. It didn't mean that I agreed with everyone, but it meant now I saw that some people, and it was actually, you know what? It was only going to India and doing research in India that allowed me to take this more empathic perspective toward conservatives, because I could not have empathized with conservatives in the 1990s. But I did a postdoc trip. I spent 3 months in Bhubaneswar, India, in eastern India. And I was studying a very religious, traditional, sex-segregated, hierarchical society. And it was only once I was trying to pretend I was an anthropologist and I was trying to understand them in their terms, not in my terms. And once I did that, I came back to America, and suddenly, the religious right was a big thing back then. Suddenly I could at least understand more traditional Christian Americans.
Well, and let me just give the pragmatic reward for this, because this isn't just an exercise to entertain yourself. When people assemble into teams, all teams follow a pattern, and eventually the team will shut down ideas, right? And you'll get further and further away from what the truth is. So if you have the goal of knowing the truth or understanding how something works, it's incumbent upon you to physically make yourself leave your team and hear the other side, right? If we have any shot at getting to the truth or facts or anything like that, we just have to protect ourselves from what it's like to be siloed or to be inside of a system.
Okay, let's go a little further with that. I think the basic insight there is correct that teams shut down open-minded thinking. But let's push on that a little bit. So you can imagine a team formed in a company to solve some problem, and they can do a great job of being open-minded, especially if they assign people the task of looking for contrary evidence. So in the Catholic Church, they invented the idea of a devil's advocate. They appointed someone specifically to point out the flaws in our thinking. Pretend you're the devil trying to confound us. What would you do? What would you say? So teams aren't necessarily closed-minded. But now take a team in a company and put them in competition with another team in the company. And, whichever one gets there first will get the bonus. Well, now there might be some competition. There might be some hostility. Now you have more a sense of us versus them. And if someone on the other team asks you for help, you might not want to give it to them because you don't want to be disloyal to your team. Well, now imagine that they're not even in the same company. Imagine it's the fans of two soccer teams in Britain. And, in American sports, we don't have much violence as far as I know between our fans. But in
Just Raiders games.
Okay.
There's some stabbings every now and then.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, they're not the English hooligans. Yeah.
So I think so what I would say is teams don't have to be closed-minded, but to the extent that we now have political teams, to the extent that you're either on the right or the left, the battle is now so pitched that it does shut down open-minded thinking. And I'm a centrist. I'm not on either team personally, but I do see, Donald Trump is beyond anything that we've had in this country. He is doing, I think, things that will damage us for a long time. So I'm not indifferent to what's happening in this country.
Sure.
And I certainly understand when people act like it's a life or death struggle. It really well could turn out to be that. I don't want to come down too heavily on one side or the other here, but just to say that our current political situation is such that passions are so much higher now than they were 2 or 3 years ago. And that guarantees that teams will make a lot of mistakes in thinking about policy.
Well, and here's where it, in my opinion, perfectly parallels what you're talking about on college campuses, because there is now a binary opposition to it all, right? There's no gray, there's no nuance, there's no context. So even on this podcast, dare I point out a point of view from the right and try to be thoughtful and really make a good argument for them. The response I get is you shouldn't be doing that because the stakes are so high. Of course, you can say that as a white male because you're not separated from your family on the border. So it is all or nothing for them. And to that, I reject that. And I say, that is not unlike saying, well, cancer, we agree, is more important to cure than nail fungus. So we shouldn't have any doctors treating nail fungus. They should all be treating cancer. That's just not true. I can look at different perspectives, also issue per issue, stand up very strongly for the families on the border. It's not all in, all out, black and white. In fact, we're required to listen to all the sides. And the way we say these systems can somehow approach objectivity, I don't think any of us liberals want to admit that we very much need the conservatives as they need us for the system to actually come up with anything beneficial. There's this checks and balances to it. I think a lot of people have this fantasy that, well, if everyone was a Democrat, this place would be heaven.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't.
One party countries tend not to work very well. So yes, what you're articulating there is a yin-yang conception of politics. And that's very much the one that I hold, that each side becomes expert in certain moral intuitions. They notice certain problems and they focus on them, but they tend to be blind to other concerns. So if your morality is based on care and compassion, you would say, let's help the poor. Let's help them as much as we can. Let's make welfare and other benefits available as much as we can. And America has obviously lagged behind Europe in creating a safety net. And so it has been since the time of Roosevelt, it clearly has been the Democrats and the left that have pushed for expanding the safety net. And without them, it wouldn't have happened. So you certainly need a left to be concerned, especially about the downtrodden. That's what the Democrats traditionally did. But at the same time, it's very easy to go way too far. And in the 1960s, the original form of welfare really did go too far in a lot of ways because it disincentivized work and marriage. And you needed conservatives to scream from the rooftops, if you disincentivize work, you'll get more people not working. If you disincentivize marriage, you'll get more people not marrying. And what happened to the black family was that African Americans had very high marriage rates. They had very stable marriages up until the 1960s. And then the rate of non-marital birth skyrocketed.
Because in practice, you could be in love with a woman, you have 2 kids. If you get married, the benefits disappear. And if you stay single, then
exactly.
Right? So that's a very clear incentive.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so if the goal is actually to help the poor, and especially the African American inner city poor, which were obviously victims of Jim Crow laws, of all kinds of racial discrimination. So if the game was, let's figure out the truth, and then the other game is let's do what we can to help, we could have solved the problem much better. But since everything is politicized, part of the game was ideology. It took people like Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a sociologist. He later became a senator, of course, but he was a sociologist commissioned in the Johnson administration to write a report on the black family. It's a very, very important report in which he wrote about all the problems when marriage disappears, that you really, really hurt kids. Kids have much less chance of success if they're raised in an unstable family environment with men cycling through. And so Moynihan wrote this, and he was savaged. He was, he was a persona non grata. The stories about that time, other professors at Harvard wouldn't let their kids play with his kids. When in fact, 30, 40 years later, finally sociologists began to admit in the 1990s, he was right. He was absolutely right. If you really want to help any poor, any group in this country, one of the important ways is to stabilize family structures and do what you can to stabilize marriage. I go into this in detail just to make the point that while the left was correct about the need to have welfare policies and to have a safety net, if you just leave it to the left to implement, they're going to implement it in ways that have all kinds of negative policy implications that they're not going to see. You need the critics. You need people to disconfirm your presuppositions in order to get a better policy.
But there are things to me as a liberal that are very counterintuitive. So one of the examples you gave was this experiment where you could put money back into a pool, and then that would be shared collectively among everyone, and then just say what happened in that scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is a very famous experiment. I'm blocking on the authors now. Maybe it's this Fair and Gactor. I'm trying to remember which one this was.
I think it was Monica and Padman.
So there's a whole series of experiments done by economists and psychologists called the social coordination or Commons dilemma problems. And so the way they generally work is the experimenter gives everybody some money, and you can keep your money, or you can put some or all of it into a common pool, and the experimenter will double or triple it. And so if everybody, suppose there's 6 people playing the game, if everybody puts in all their money and then they share the pool after the experimenter triples it, everybody is better off. But each individual is best off putting nothing in and hoping that everybody else puts in.
That's the free rider in biology.
Exactly. So there's been a lot of experiments on free riding and what it takes to reduce it. And one of the most effective ways to reduce it is to allow people to punish. So if one of your options is you can pay money on the current round to punish whoever cheated or defected in the last round. The interesting variation is in one of these games, you can choose whether to join a game that allows punishment or to join a game that allows no punishment. And a lot of people think, oh, wow, I don't want to be punished. I'll go to the game that has no punishment. And then you play the game for a while and you quickly realize, oh my God, everyone's cheating. And then if you give people the option, they often choose to switch over to the game where there is punishment, because in those games, everyone's cooperating. And so this, I take it to be one of the conservative insights, that you really have to be vigilant about free riders. You have to punish cheaters, because people people will cooperate.
It gives them belief in the overall system, weirdly.
That's right.
And you have to buy in. This is we had a lawyer on who pointed out this. It was a quote from John Adams, that was, you can't incarcerate an innocent person in this country, because if you do, now we know the whole system's flawed. And if I can go to jail for doing nothing, then I might as well do something. Like that, it's very counterintuitive in that way as well. But you have to make everyone know the system works and that people will be punished, as you say, so that they can buy in and do their part. Mm-hmm. There's like a certain belief in the system required.
Well, that's right. I think that there are incredible gains that happen in a democracy, in a diverse democracy such as ours, if you can basically trust that others are basically playing by the rules. Then you'll put forth more effort. There are just many efficiencies. I remember reading an article about how in Moscow, when an ambulance siren sounds, nobody gets out of the way, because corrupt officials put a siren on their car all the time. If you hear a siren, there's probably nobody sick. It's just some corrupt official. So to hell with him.
Yeah, late for happy hour.
Yeah, exactly. So if people don't trust the system, things descend very quickly. And so I think this is very important for us to think about. As we are experiencing a rapid decline in trust in our institutions and in each other, this is very dangerous for the future of our country. Now, this is happening all over the world. It's in part due to social media, making it very easy to expose true corruption, and making it also easy for people to amplify things and to even make up stuff. So we're all facing problems. There is a decline in the vigor and health of democracies around the world. But man, ours is really in trouble.
Yes. Now, my fear with what I hear my party doing is that they try to explain the other and reduce it down to a single thing. So it's very popular for people on the left to just say, everyone who voted for Trump's a racist, or everyone's a homophobic, or everyone's xenophobic, or everyone's a misogynist.
Right.
And in doing that, you've just said goodbye to possibly understanding what really is the difference, or what really is the solution, or what really we can learn or build or better, right? So there's a danger in us labeling each other. Would you agree that once we've labeled the other person as this, that, or another thing, it's a permanent condition, it's total contempt, and then there's nowhere up from there, is there?
That's right. So an important change in our politics happened possibly in 2004. It used to be that you won an election you got the nomination for president by moving to the extreme, and then as soon as you won the nomination, you'd move to the middle, because there was most Americans are not very extreme, but gradually the middle has shrunk, and Karl Rove correctly calculated in 2004 that the middle had shrunk so much that the way you win is by really angering your base, so that if conservative turnout goes from 60% to 65%, you win, and that's why they seized on gay marriage in 2004. It was a very strategic calculation, and it worked. So around then is also roughly when we transitioned from what's called positive politics, which is where people vote for the candidate they like, to what is now called negative politics, which is people vote against the candidate that they most hate. And this is very dangerous for us, because it means that the election wasn't necessarily, so people who voted for Trump, some of them loved him, I'm sure, but the dominant dynamic was that some people really, really hated Hillary Clinton, and some people really, really hated Donald Trump. And so to understand Trump voters as they must have been motivated by the worst things about Trump and his appeal, well, that is just not true. A lot of people voted against Hillary Clinton.
That was the only way the next morning I could. I was having such cognitive dissonance. I was the one with the most egg on my face. I'm like, oh, she's going to win by X amount. I mean, it couldn't have been more wrong.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, I thought, how on earth am I going to now explain what happened? It's just so disjointed from what I thought would happen. And my explanation was basically exactly what you just said. It's easier for me to accept that many people hated Hillary Clinton than it is for me to accept that many people loved Donald Trump.
Right.
That's how I kind of made peace with that whole thing.
That's right. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. A really interesting analysis came from, I think his name is Ivan Krastev. I think he's Bulgarian by origin, but he writes sometimes for the New York Times. He had this brilliant column in which he talked about why the meritocracy all around the world now, in many countries, not just America, why the meritocracy is so destructive, so bad. And what he pointed out is that since in America and also in a lot of Asian countries, the meritocracy is based on test taking. So the American elite are those who did really, really well in the SAT.
Yeah.
And then they got into the top school and they did really well in the MCATs or the GRE or whatever. And so if you have this kind of meritocracy, which is not based on, did you do something amazing? Did you start an amazing company? I mean, obviously those things do matter overall. But if we have a meritocracy based on test taking, it's not just that we have an elite that's like pointy-headed people that people love to hate. It's that the people at the top believe they deserved it. Like, of course I deserve to be on the top. I got the highest score in the SAT.
Yes, yes.
So you get this self-satisfied elite that looks down its nose at the less educated, at those in the heartland, at those who don't share its hyper-progressive values. And that basically, the elite in America and the UK and elsewhere, the elite spends much of its time competing with each other to call more and more people racist. That's how you get prestige in the cosmopolitan elite, is by bashing racist, sexist, homophobic Islamophobes. And most people don't want to be called that.
Yeah.
And many of them go vote for Trump or join the alt-right.
Yes, and it's very weird. And I feel like you talked about this on Sam Harris, but there's something unique too about the conversations we would have if this microphone was off, and then the conversations we have when we know we have an audience, because that changes us dramatically, right?
In general, sure. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to believe that I would say exactly the same thing to you if this was over a beer. And of course, I know in some sense that can't be true.
Yes, but it's necessary, though. Let's just say that sociologically, it's quite necessary for us to have a public and a private persona.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
It's imperative, right? I need to be able to talk to my wife about stuff in bed and throw some very dodgy stuff up on the wall and see what sticks. And she bats me down, and I realize I've gone too far. And if I can't do that there, how on earth am I to find out or to evolve or to perfect or to refine? Right. And what's gotten very blurry is this social media platform.
Yeah, that's right.
Is neither, and yet it dips into both, and it's confusing, right?
Yeah. So a lot of sociological theory. There's a wonderful book by Irving Goffman, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, and so you come to appreciate how much we are programmed to be skillful at behaving in the right way in the right context, and we're very concerned about our public presentation of face. And so we can be very inauthentic at times, but then in private moments, we're much more authentic. Well, I think life is good when there are lots of different environments, different games we're playing, different salons, maybe you might say, in which we're talking. And what social media has done, unfortunately, is it's knocked down all the walls so that everything is, in a sense, behavior in public. And this is not so much true for people, all right, I guess I'm older than you, but I'm 54, but
I'm right behind you.
Okay. Yeah. But for people, for young people, and this is why Gen Z or iGen, kids born in 1995 and after, they have only known growing up with social media. And so if most of your social life is such that one slip, one word, and you can be shamed with no end, this really, it deprives you of the opportunity to throw things at the wall and see if they stick.
Yeah, if I had to stand by every idea I had at 18 years old, there's no way. I've learned so much, thank God, in 30 plus, whatever years. Yet there would be a historical record in writing had I been born in 1995, because I would have written it and it would exist. And I have to imagine it disincentivizes anyone with a kind of progressive thought. The stakes are just so high. Are we not,
right.
Aren't we killing what could be probably great ideas or solutions? Because it's just who wants to stick their neck out?
Exactly. So people learn best by feedback. People learn best by trying something, and either it succeeds or it fails. We learn faster when it fails. We learn faster from negative. You burn your hand once on a stove, and you learn not to touch the stove without gently checking whether it was just on.
And again, that's biochemical evolution, oxytocin's 10 times as strong as dopamine. So if you eat a poisonous apple, you better fucking remember that was poisonous versus a yummy strawberry. There's a whole system upstairs to govern that.
Right. This is behavior. This is behaviorism. This is learning theory. This is Pavlov and Watson and all the classic psychologists. So kids need a lot of negative feedback. They need to try things and then they fail or they get hurt and then they learn often in a single trial. And so if you think about behavior in school, and if you can try things and you get feedback and then you don't do it again, well, you learned. But if you try something and then the feedback is that you're destroyed socially, what does it do to you? It means you're not going to try much stuff. You're going to be very careful.
Ever again, probably.
Ever again. Well, yeah. If you talk to college professors now, and maybe it's happening in high school too, college professors about what's going on in seminar classes, and a lot of them tell me, I can't get discussion going anymore. I mean, if it's about some that nobody cares about, they'll talk. But if it has anything to do with race, gender, politics, nobody dares to disagree with the party line.
Well, I have a question or a thought, because I fully agree with all of this panic being over the top and exaggerated. But I guess my only issue is I feel like we're telling that group that you're being too sensitive, which I think they are. But we're telling one group you're being too sensitive, and then we take this group of conservative white men who are, voting for Trump and who feel not heard or not this, or we're calling them racist and they don't like it. We're saying we need to be more sensitive to those people, but we have to tell this other marginalized group that they're acting too sensitive. And to me, it's like, well, there needs to be a little more.
I have an answer for that.
Dispersed. Okay.
Yeah.
Mine, quite simply, is no one on the right's listening to me. There's no way I can enact self-improvement on the right because I'm not in that group. But I hope I have enough trust within the liberal community that they might listen to me. And I also think in my own life experience, I am the only variable in every equation that I can alter. I can't alter how Jonathan's going to react to anything. I can only adjust my own behavior. So I'm trying to fix my side, or as much as I can, be self-reflective and think how we can improve. I like to think I'm speaking for academia. I worship it. I think it's one of the greatest things for us humans to have created. So I'm trying to protect something I love. I don't think I could influence someone on the right who's not even listening to me. By the way, liberals, no one on the right's listening to you. They're only listening to themselves, and we're only listening to ourselves. So it's such wasted talk, in my opinion. So I'm trying to clean up my side of the street. I pray there's people on the right that are trying to clean up their side of the street. And that would be my defense for why I'm critical of my side and not the other.
But I think Monica's pointing out that I'm talking about how we should structure our universities, and also by extension, our companies and any kind of group. And so I think Monica's right to say, John, are you saying that one side has to suck it up and stop being so sensitive? So that's a very fair question. And if that's what I was saying, yeah, I'd be embarrassed to say that. And while conceivably it would still be good advice, it certainly is kind of offensive, and I don't think it's good advice. So I think about it very differently. As we are trying to increase diversity, and in every organization I'm in, we're trying to increase diversity. This always is going to increase the risk of misunderstandings and conflicts, always. So what are we going to do? We have to do two things at the same time. We all have to learn to give less offense. And we're doing this. When I think about the kinds of jokes, like when I was in college in the 80s, nobody made race jokes. I mean, that was totally taboo by then. But gay jokes, sure, you can make gay jokes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it was in the 80s. And then by the 90s or 2000s, in prestigious or elite colleges, or maybe everywhere, I don't know, then gay jokes were out. So there is social progress. People get shamed for making these jokes. In other words, people have to learn to be to be less offensive, to be more sensitive. And that's been happening steadily. And perhaps that's mostly advice to the white men. I don't know. So we do have to educate incoming classes about what's a kind of a question which, even if it isn't badly intentioned, ends up being annoying. Asian students who are asked over and over and over again, "Where are you from?" No, where are you really from? Like, where you okay, don't do that.
And you gave the example, like a lot of black students will complain about people touch their hair.
Exactly. Yeah. So we've got to teach people to give less offense, and that's mostly going to be, if you want to put it in the language of privilege, fine. That's going to be mostly talking to the more privileged groups. But at the same time, suppose we do that, and suppose we are, over the decades, we've been actually quite successful at that. Not perfect, but we're making a lot of progress. At the same time, suppose we steadily shift the goalposts. That what counts as offensive, we keep moving that. And suppose we move the goalposts even faster than we make progress. Suppose we start saying, all right, there's no more, violence like physical violence, and people aren't using, people are hardly ever using,
racial pejoratives.
Terms. Yeah. I mean, you hardly ever hear such words anymore. Let's focus on microaggressions. Let's define what is offensive at a lower and lower level. It's possible then that we can make progress decade after decade. And I think we have on every front. And you think about how quickly gay rights came in, gay marriage, and then from, hardly anyone was thinking about transgender issues 7 or 8 years ago. So the progress, by any objective sense, the progress is extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if we keep moving the goalposts and teaching students to be more and more sensitive, we might actually be hurting everyone. So this is what I'm saying, that we have to deal with all the problems at the same time. We have to have a sense that this is a common project, that if you want diversity, then you have to teach people to be more forgiving, to judge by intent, not by impact alone. The common idea now on campus is intent does not matter, it's only impact. And that's our second grade on truth, is always trust your feelings. And we then try to teach students to find harm, to find offense at things that would not have offended people a few years ago, that were not malintentioned. So I'm saying that if we want to do the diversity project, we have to think very carefully about it. And a lot of the things we do as part of the diversity project are making things worse, especially for those in historically marginalized groups.
Well, and intention's very, very relevant. And you make a great example. Just take getting bumped into on the street. Now, if it was an accident, there is no moral implication. Mm-hmm. The person went out of their way to shove you, there's a huge moral implication.
And so this is crucial for understanding the concept of microaggressions. The concept is, if you just think about the idea of a microaggression, you might think it's a perfectly legitimate concept, that you can have aggression. You could, somebody could, yell a racial slur, somebody could yell an insult. That's aggressive. It's verbal. It's not physical, but it's aggression. And so it might be useful to have a concept of small aggressions, microaggressions. Somebody says something subtle. It's a little dig that they can deny. So it could be a useful concept. The problem is that when it was defined in a paper by Darrell Wing Su, a professor at Teachers College, he specifically defined it in such a way that intention is not necessary, that it doesn't matter what was intended. What matters is what was felt. He said that racial microaggressions can even be unintentional. In fact, they can even result from efforts to be helpful or nice. So a lot of mischief, a lot of problems come about by calling such events aggression. If he had simply called them faux pas or clumsy gestures, there are all kinds of things that people can do that are well-meaning that end up being annoying to members of various groups. It's great to educate members of a new community about those things.
100%.
But if you call them aggression, so imagine being an Asian student. Imagine your first generation, you were born in America, your parents came from China. So far, until now, Asians have been moving up, as fast as Jews ever did. Asian immigrants come to America. They have incredibly high rates of marriage. Their families are very focused on achievement. So the Asians, my wife is Korean. Her family story, it's different from my family story, but the Korean experience in America is very similar to the Jewish experience in a lot of ways. So very rapid progress. Imagine that you tell Asian Americans to perceive the environment around them as full of not just aggression, but violence. Words are violence. Everyone, you are marginalized. You are a member of a marginalized group. What a good way to block their progress. What a good way to prevent them from throwing themselves into things. What a good way to prevent them from forming friendships, and what a good way to make them see the world as threatening. So this is what we mean by saying in our subtitle, how good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure. So much of what we do to make progress on issues of identity ends up, I believe, harming the very students we're trying to help.
Well, and also, doesn't it give victimhood itself some prestige? Isn't it incentivized to be at the center, to be the victim of one of these atrocities?
Exactly. That's right. That's the clearest way of identifying what's wrong here. Everybody is engaged in the search for prestige. Everybody wants to be
I want
respected.
it. Yeah.
We all want it.
Yeah.
And so if you look at any system and you think, what do people do to get prestige in that system? And that's why we in New York love to look down on you in LA, because we think you guys are also obsessed with beauty and fame. You think that's it. And of course, you can then look down on us because you probably think, with our Wall Street culture, all we care about is money. I don't know. What is it that you hate about us?
Every time someone from New York starts telling me why LA sucks, I always tell them the same thing, which is true. We love New York. You guys are in a one-sided fight. You guys, it's like LA versus New York. Not for us. We love New York. We love going there. We love all New Yorkers. It's all you guys. So that leads me to believe we're triggering some inferiority complex. It's probably the fucking weather. I don't know what it is, but we are not in a war with you.
You have better weather and more beautiful people. We
even have it intrastate where the Northern California is fighting, but we're not fighting with them. We love San Francisco.
You guys are all so mellow and well adjusted.
No, we dig it. Yeah. It's like, oh, okay. Why do we suck? Oh, our pizza sucks. Oh, cool. Whatever. Yeah, I love your pizza.
So if you imagine that teenagers or college students are competing based on who's more successful. Well, if you're in such an economy, you'll be more successful. Imagine they're competing on who's a better athlete. Well, people will throw themselves into athletics. If you imagine them competing on who is more victimized, on who can tell a better story about how they've been victimized by the system, by the man, by oppressive power structures, if that's what you're incentivizing, then people will go for that. And boy, is that a good way to set them up for failure. If you want, America's a wide open society compared to Europe, compared to other places. The upside is unlimited. This is what European immigrants tell us. This is what young people in Europe tell us. If you really want to be successful, you have to go to America. Now, I don't know if that's still true in the last couple of years. Things are changing here. But the larger point is just that in a really threatening, closed environment, it is often adaptive to be defensive, to be paranoid. But in a wide open society with unlimited upside, it really doesn't pay to be paranoid. It pays to take chances, put yourself out there, try again. If you fall down, try again. And what we're doing in a victimhood culture is we are teaching students to not do that.
Well, and what I'm nervous for them in is that while it may be incentivized on Twitter and Facebook and your college campus, going to General Motors as an engineer and being the biggest victim there, that is not going to get you promoted. It's not going to result in more money or anything you would want, more opportunity. No one wants to work with the person who is a perpetual victim.
That's right. And I hear this. So I teach in a business school. So I hear business leaders and executives saying this now, like they read about and they hear about what's happening on college campuses, and they say, who would want to employ such a person? And now it's beginning to happen. So the campus culture really kind of broke out in 2015. And at the time, people said, when Greg Lukianoff and I published our article in The Atlantic, a lot of people said, oh, that's just college students, being, they're being political, they're being whatever. As soon as they join the real world, they're going to have to give that up and get to work. Well, it turns out that in industries that hire from elite schools, they're hiring a lot of elite college students. So just in the last year, I'm hearing from journalists and people in tech that this victimhood culture, this safety culture, this idea that people are fragile and that the boss has to protect them from each other, has to protect them from people writing a memo that is so threatening to me that it is essentially violence against me. This culture is creeping in rapidly, and if anyone stands up to it, they will be called out for being insensitive. So I am concerned that this victimhood-based safetyism culture is creeping out into certain areas of corporate life. And I think ultimately it's going to sap the vitality and the creativity of those industries.
Now, let me ask you this. This is going to be very provocative. Part of me wants to zoom way, way out, outside of our atmosphere and recognize perhaps, let's take vaccines as an example. Vaccines end up being a victim of their own success, right? So anyone that grew up when my grandparents did saw the effects of polio. It was everywhere. I don't know what there's 30% of people had polio, something outrageous, right? So there were many kids at your school on crutches and whatnot. So you saw it firsthand. Now we get this polio vaccine and it works like crazy. It's so effective. It works. Now you have people in Oregon who've never seen polio, right, and now they're evaluating something they've never seen against the notion of putting something foreign in their baby's body. And it becomes a hard decision for them to make solely based on how great this vaccine worked. I just want to question, this may be too taboo, but don't young people just need something? And is it maybe in place of that there isn't a Vietnam War to protest, or that there isn't, like as we get better, because I am a Steven Pinker, I believe, and I had a great anthropology teacher that said, you know what, just zoom out and look how long we've been here and look how much we've accomplished. And this is a new experiment. Civilization, it's so new. And look where we were at. Even in our own country, you had ferry boat captains smashing into each other and killing all the passengers. I mean, that's the shit that was happening 200 years ago. So we've made this incredible progress. Now, as we get closer and closer to an even more utopian existence, we're not going to unplug the wiring that wants us to prove ourselves to our tribe and to fight for something and to stand for something. And when we have nothing to stand for, what happens then? Is that too big of a question, or does that cross your mind?
Yeah, no. Well, I think it draws together.
I'm not trivializing the things that they care about currently, younger people, but it does beg the question.
Yeah. So Greg and I we opened the book up with a discussion of problems of progress. Is a useful term. So as we solve one problem, we then focus on smaller and smaller problems, and so in one sense that's progress. In another sense, we're kind of neurotic, over concerned, focused on little things. Our grandparents, our great grandparents had much less comfortable physical environments. In a lot of ways, we're spoiled. We couldn't, it would be hard for us even to survive in houses from the 19th century that lacked.
If I had to use an outhouse, I don't know. I might end it.
So one kind of progress that we've made is as we get wealthier and safer, and as technology has made it possible to have a family without a woman spending her entire life doing laundry and cooking, as women enter the workforce, we have smaller and smaller families. And in many ways, this is good. It certainly is good for the planet in terms of, it's not unsustainable for everybody to have 5 kids. So it's progress to have smaller families. But then what happens is we invest far more in each child, and we worry a lot more. If you have one child, you're really overprotective. If you have 5, I mean, I don't want to quite say, what the hell, you lose 1 or 2. I don't want to be insensitive in that way, but that was more the ethos. When you have one child, you overprotect them.
If you just read history, we've just till recently had any president who hadn't lost a kid or two. Like you look at President Lincoln, like they're dealing with having lost a son while they're going through all that other stuff. I mean, that was commonplace to lose a child.
That's right. So obviously this is gigantic progress that we've got infant mortality down. The accident rate for kids is way down. We have safer consumer products. Our cars are safer. This is all good. But an unforeseen side effect of it is that it's easier to accept the idea that we should protect our kids from all bad experiences, that our playgrounds should be perfectly safe. And what we're just beginning to realize in the last couple of years is that there's such a thing as risk deprivation syndrome. And the idea here is that adults have learned to navigate through the world and judge risk for themselves. And so we can judge whether to cross the street, we can judge whether to start a business, we can judge all sorts of things. But we only can judge that because we were allowed to take risk on for ourselves when we were kids. Maybe there's a tree and you decide to climb the tree. And at one point you're scared out of your mind because you realize, oh my God, how am I going to get down? Or maybe this branch will break. And it almost never does break, but you do something scary, you go too far and you discover your limits. Well, what began to happen in the 1980s and 90s, especially in America, where we had a litigation, a liability crisis, and everybody was at risk of being sued, and so schools had to get rid of anything that could be at all dangerous.
Go buy long darts.
That's right. And so playgrounds became incredibly safe. Child's play became incredibly safe, and also it became very heavily supervised. So once kids always have a safety net, once there's always an adult who will tell them, they don't learn to judge for themselves. And so in Britain, where they're having a lot of the same problems as us, in Britain, they have actually begun introducing risk to playgrounds. There's a wonderful playground on Governor's Island. So in New York City, there's Governor's Island is a little island just south of Wall Street. And there's what's called the Junkyard Playground. And I had to sign like a 5-page liability waiver to let my kids onto it. But they have construction material. They have hammers and nails. And I watch, and they have all kinds of signs on the fence telling the parents, stop supervising, just let your kids play.
Yeah.
And I watched as some, it looked like they were about 10 or 11 years old, some boys, they were pounding nails. There's nails and lumber, and they're hammers. And so I don't know if they have saws, but they have hammers. And I watched as a kid pounded a nail. He was pounding. And then I could see him, he obviously hit his thumb.
Sure.
And he pulled his thumb away and he shakes it out.
It's inevitable.
And you might think, oh my God, Is he okay? He hit his thumb.
Mm.
And what does the kid do? He shakes at his thumb and he goes back to pounding.
Yeah.
And then he hits it again and he shakes it out and he goes back to pounding and then he doesn't hit it again.
Yeah. Eventually he gets good at hammering.
He figured out how to, that's right. Whereas my son has no idea how to hammer nails. Now I live in an apartment. I do own a hammer, but I have no lumber.
Sure.
The point is, in Britain, they've begun to realize that kids need small risks. And if you watch kids play, when kids learn to skateboard, what do? Just go down the hill all the time? No, they start going down the staircase, the railings. The kids need risk. Not risk that they're going to fall off the 13th floor and die, but risk that they're going to fall off a fence and bang their head. Yes, they need risk. And we've deprived them of it. This might be one reason why the anxiety, depression, and suicide rates are going up so quickly.
Well, because kids have not learned any coping skills under the helicopter parent paradigm, right?
That's right.
And I think Dr. Drew makes a great point too, is like all these parents are shocked their kids go away to college and they're immediately addicted to benzos and opiates. And it's like, well, what did you think? You didn't give them a single tool in the toolbox to deal with disappointment and heartbreak.
Exactly. That's right. The job of a parent.
It's too painful if you wait till 20 to do it.
Exactly. The job of a parent is to work him or herself out of a job. And that's the way my parents looked at it. They said, when you go off to college, we'll pay for college and that's it. You're on your own. And I learned how to travel by myself. But now, for a lot of reasons, parents stay in very close touch all the way through college. So a thought experiment that I like to do is ask people, suppose we just decided that, reading, there are some risks to reading. You might read something upsetting. So what if we said, no reading till you're 15? Nobody gets to read till they're 15. And then you can start reading because you're old enough. Do we think that there might be any lasting damage? Do we think that kids might end up as adults being less good as readers? And of course, the answer is yes. Okay, if you believe that, then what if we don't let kids have any true independence till they're 15? What if we say, you can't walk 7 blocks to a store and buy something and come home? You can't go out with your friends and hang out by the river throwing rocks in the river. You can't do that until you're 14 or 15. And now you're old enough, now you can do that. Do we think that there might be any lasting hit to their ability to live independently out in the world? Of course.
Yeah.
Of course there is. If you look at every kid's story, practically, it involves kids between the age of 8 and 12 leaving the protection of parents and flying off on a magical turtle to a land of rainbows and fire, or whatever. There's always some adventure.
Walking through a wardrobe.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I'm reading these stories with my kids and I'm thinking, my God, my kids have never had an adventure.
Well, and you read a great book written by a woman. What was it called?
Lenore Skenazy, Free Range Kids.
There you go.
That's the book.
And she famously, I learned this from you, but apparently it caused a big uproar. She let her 9-year-old or something ride the subway and people thought it was child abuse.
That's right. Yeah, in 2009. So the crime rate had already plummeted in New York. New York is now as safe as it was when my parents were growing up in the 30s, the 1930s. And my parents would ride the subway at the age of 9, 10. They would go all over the city. Just as me and my friends rode our bicycle all over our town, beginning at the age of 8 or 9. Kids I studied street kids for a while. All over the world, the street kid phenomena starts at age 8. A 6-year-old, if you have a bunch of 6-year-olds, they can't survive on their own. But if you have a bunch of 8-year-olds, they can steal food, run from the cops, find a place to sleep at night. Mm-hmm. 8-year-olds are ready to explore the world.
Mm-hmm.
And they always did explore the world until the 1990s. We stopped them from exploring the world. Later on, and of course, video
ironically, when it got safe enough to really let them do, yes.
That's right. Just as the crime rate was plummeting, we had a huge crime wave beginning in the 60s and it ended in the 90s. And just as it's ending, we cracked down on kids. Now, I need to find out, when were the first stories of parents being arrested because their kids were caught playing in a park? That began happening in the early 2008, 2010. We started hearing stories. I don't know whether it was happening in the 90s, but by 2010, those kinds of stories were getting more common. Yeah. So now parents are really afraid to let their kids out because they could be arrested.
We have these pandemic freakouts, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And I learned this in Anthro. I had a witchcraft class and the teacher said, that there's never, ever been someone who put razor blades in the Halloween candy. It's never happened.
Yeah, that's right.
I was like, no, wait, that's impossible. No, it happened in my town. And you have fire departments scanning X-raying candy all across the country. The power of that.
Exactly. So one of the, when we try to explain why did the culture on campus change so rapidly around 2015, Where did these ideas that we're fragile, the world is dangerous, we have to be protected from books and ideas, where did this come from? So we have a whole chapter on what we call paranoid parenting. And again, this happened to us in the 80s and 90s, in part because of cable TV and all sorts of other things. For any listeners who remember the Michael Moore movie, Bowling for Columbine,
great.
He documents how, or he argues at least, that part of the American freak out is that we've been exposed constantly to news stories about crime, whereas in Canada, they're much calmer. They're not as afraid. They often leave their doors unlocked, at least when they're home. Why lock your door if you're home? But Americans generally wouldn't do that. So as the media environment changes, it puts in our faces stories of risk that are vastly out of proportion to reality, but it sells. And so back to your point about how our brains are adapted for the environment of evolutionary adaptation. We don't live in that environment anymore. It makes sense to be on a hair trigger and to learn about new kinds of danger if there's a new kind of predator in your environment. But we live in incredibly safe times. And I think it's really tragic when I think about what it was like growing up in the 70s when we'd be out, exploring, we'd be out somewhere. And if you got lost, you would ask someone for help.
Yeah, you had no choice. You didn't have a cell phone or Uber.
That's right. Strangers used to be useful.
Yes.
And so you had to cultivate the skill of talking to a stranger.
Yes.
Excuse me, sir, which way is Bright Avenue? Or in extreme, excuse me, can I use your phone to call my mother?
Yeah.
And nobody would do that today because kids are taught stranger danger. And they often have cell phones with them, so you don't need strangers. So the point is, kids nowadays, I believe, are much more fearful of strangers. The world seems more threatening, even though it's much safer. And this is part of the reason that we see, one of the contributors to why we see people freaking out about the world being dangerous when it isn't really.
So you've implemented a little bit of this in your own, right?
Yeah.
So your own son, you will send to the store?
Yeah. So in part because I read Lenore Skenazy's book, Free Range Kids. It's a wonderful book. I recommend it to everybody who has kids. And because she lives in New York and I've been working with her, and we started an organization, she runs it, called Let Grow. I urge everybody to go to letgrow.org. So I've tried to encourage my kids to go outside. And it's difficult because they say there's no one else out there without a parent. But now I live right on Washington Square Park. It's a beautiful park in New York City. And there are 3 playgrounds in it. And my daughter, who she actually started reading, she's 8. She actually started reading Free Range Kids. She loves to, she's very independent minded, and that's part of her identity. She's very proud of that. She's really taken it upon herself to just go out into the park and play. And even though all the other kids out there have a parent nearby, there are at least kids for her to play with at the playgrounds. And my hope is, and as I tour around with this book, I'm trying to encourage this, is that everyone who is a parent, everybody out there listening, if you have kids between the ages of, let's say, 6 and 12, go to letgrow.org, find other parents in your neighborhood, find a place, designate a place. It might be in a park or a playground, or it might be somebody's backyard. Maybe it's just, let's call it Free Range Fridays. Maybe you and some other, the parents of your kids' friends, you agree to have Free Range Fridays. No piano lessons, no soccer lessons. On Fridays, the kids hang out at such and such a place or in somebody's backyard. And it's very important that they not be supervised. So there can be an adult nearby. If there's a problem, they can go get them. But it's very important that the kids decide what to do. No adult is there saying, oh, don't do that. You have to let them try out some small risks. And it's scary. It is scary. But what's the alternative? A kid who is more prone to depression, anxiety, and suicide, and who goes off to college, you get him into college, and then he or she flounders and fails. So if you keep that...
Yeah, the stakes are pretty high.
Yeah, that's right.
And in your own experience, did you take baby steps? Like the first time you let your son go to the store across the street, I imagine you stared out the window.
So with each kid, when they first went out on their solo missions, I actually followed them from a distance.
Sure. Because ever since I heard you say this, I've been kind of plotting how I'm going to do this with my 5.5-year-old, because she is incredibly competent. I could actually just tell her to go to school and she'd pack her lunch and do it. Like I know she can. Yeah. But I have been thinking of like, okay, I got to tail her in a way she has no idea.
Yeah. So you can do that. That's mostly for your benefit the first time. Now, with my daughter, she has no sense of direction whatsoever. So I've been trying to get her to get to the point where she can walk from our apartment in the northwest corner of the park to my office in the southeast corner. And we did the big experiment 2 months ago. She was going to do it and she didn't show up. And because she has no sense of direction, so she went down the wrong street and then she was crying, but she did at least make it back home.
Oh, wow.
So that one failed.
Sure. Well, but or did it?
That's right. Exactly. That's right.
How did she ask a stranger?
No, she will never ask a stranger. I'm working with her on this.
Okay.
She's too shy.
Okay.
And so she wants to walk to school by herself. And I say, no way. Until you can walk around our neighborhood and ask a stranger to call me, until you pass that test, I'm not letting you walk to school.
Yeah.
And she doesn't want to do that. But it's not that she's afraid of risk, it's that she's shy socially.
And I'm gonna negate everything I said about the white male right now and just say that I tell my own kids to go find a woman.
Yeah.
I say to go find a woman and ask for help.
Yeah.
I trust them way more.
No, that's right. Yeah, certainly in terms of sexual abuse. There are not a lot of women out there sexually abusing anybody.
They're not shooting up places. They're not sexually abusing.
Right.
They're nicer in a lot of ways. So I just want to ask you one last question. Yeah. I'm curious, do you ask yourself, like epistemologically, what about your personal story? Mm-hmm. I've heard you talk a million times. I know nothing about your personal story. Mm-hmm. What is it about your childhood that led you to this? Have you even asked yourself why you would even want, what riddle are you trying to solve?
So no, a couple of things. I mean, so first let's start by saying whatever explanations we give of our own behavior, we have no real privileged access. I'm going to make up a story. It's not more reliable than any story that, you could make up about me if you knew a little bit more about me. But I'm happy to speculate. It's always fun to do. So one thing, there was a wonderful show, what's his name? The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell, a man who studied mythology. And I watched his series on PBS in the 1990s. And he said, figure out what mythological character you are. If you were a character in a myth, what would it be? And for me, it was really clear. It was the explorer. I didn't want to be the king or the magician or I wanted to be the explorer. I've always been very high on openness to experience, curiosity. I love being a professor. I love being a social scientist. So I'm really, really motivated to know and learn, not to have power. That's one thing. Another, and this is again, very speculative.
But can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
What is it about exploration do you think was the medicine you needed? Did you feel bored in your town? Did you feel?
No, it's just, temperament is very heritable. So if I had an identical twin, he would probably be very much like me. He'd probably be a bad athlete who, was, so that's always been my thing is I just love to learn. So I have the perfect job for me. Another thing is that I'm the middle child and my older and younger sisters have never, ever ganged up on me. They never really got along. And so I was always very good at both siding with one or the other, but also at mediating. I was very good at seeing both sides of a story and mediating. That might be relevant. I don't know. But I think the real moment, what really led me down the path to all the work I'm doing now is that I set out to write a book to help the Democrats win. I set out to use moral psychology to help my side win. And because I did that, I committed to understanding conservatives on their own terms and in their own language, just as I had done in India trying to understand traditional Hindu morality. And so because my professional work was to understand morality, and I committed to understanding conservative morality and then later libertarian morality, I think I was able to really see the value in multiple perspectives. I was able to really see just how limited every team is. And that is what allowed me to step out and say I'm not on any team. And I think as a social scientist, it's been really good for me. I feel as though I'm a better social scientist now that I'm not trying to help one side win.
I love some of your thought experiments you've given, though, about morality and the things we think are, we know in our gut it's wrong to sleep with your sister on vacation, but we can't really explain why other than just in our gut we do. Like, I love all those things. Anyway, such a pleasure to talk to you. Your book, which you don't like the title, you were given the title.
The coddling of the American mind.
That's the part you don't like.
It's catchy, and we could not come up with a better one, even though we didn't like the.
It's provocative. I like it. It implies we need to fix this immediately, or we're gonna perish somehow in a big fire. But Jonathan Haidt, it's a real honor to have you here. I hope you'll come back when you write your next book. I'm sure you're not done writing. Yeah.
If I could just put in a closing plug for the book,
please do.
Because so many of these problems are social coordination problems. That is. A lot of the problems young people are having are not ones that you can solve by yourself or that a parent can solve by him or herself. We have to get schools working better to give kids more freedom, more autonomy, more self-governance. So my closing request is if you're listening to this, okay, this will sound like a blatant plug, but give a copy of the book, The Coddling of the American Mind. Give it to the principal of your school, or if you're in a university, if you're a student, give it to anybody in administration. We have to get a common vocabulary for talking about these problems and for reforming social systems to be better suited to children's developmental needs.
Yeah.
So that's my closing plea.
And we also probably need an agreed upon approach to dealing with, because quite often people do need to get fired. There are racists working among us, and they probably shouldn't hold positions of educating students. And there are many different variables in how we should deal with it. But there's no course of action, right? It's just per each university. Some people are firing people. I think you applaud University of Chicago. Don't you like how they deal with?
The key thing about the University of Chicago is they have a statement saying the university provides a platform on which the members of the community are free to air their views. The university does not take sides, and it is committed to vigorous intellectual debate. Even if someone says something, promotes an idea that others find offensive, it's up to the rest of the community to argue it down, not to shut it down.
Okay. Well, I like that. Jonathan Haidt, thank you so much for coming, and I hope I get to talk to you again.
My pleasure, Dax. I'd love to talk to you again, too.
And now my favorite part of the show, the fact check with my soulmate, Monica Padman. My anaconda don't want none unless you got facts, hun. You can do side bends or sit-ups, but please don't lose those facts. Baby got facts.
That was great. I'm a little worried we did that before. Oh, Rob said no. I love it. Do you know that I was obsessed with Nicki Minaj's Anaconda?
Wait, she owned an anaconda?
No. She had a song called Anaconda.
Okay.
And
was it a penis reference?
And it sampled Baby Got Back.
Ooh.
And I loved it.
You loved it.
I love Nicki Minaj.
You do?
Mm-hmm.
Is she sane?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay. I've only kind of seen maybe a clip or two of her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to choose my words carefully because I'd love to have her on this
Me
program.
Too.
But has she been in some beefs?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
She's been in beefs.
I think it's really fascinating when people are in beefs
I mean,
because it seems like I'd have to talk myself into being in a beef. Like I'd have to really get my head right so I didn't sound like a bozo and I felt heartfelt.
right.
Who could care about anything?
That's true. I'm surprised. I bet you've been in. Well,
I bet you've been in some beefs.
I wouldn't be surprised if you've been in a beef.
Like a
You've
public
been in
beef.
fights.
Well, yeah, fights are different. That's something real. Evan Rachel Wood.
Evan Rachel Wood.
Okay, so that's probably as close to a beef as I've gotten. And it was simply that I made a joke on Twitter
Yeah.
about, I think, a guy killing a rhinoceros or something, saying that he was compensating.
A rare animal.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Suggesting that he was compensating
Yeah.
for a teeny beanie.
You're right.
And she said that I was penis shaming.
Yeah.
Which I understand she feels passionate about. But
Sure.
again, this becomes one of my issues where it's like, we can't take away all insults that are good
Right.
that should shame someone who kills a white rhino.
That's true.
But
None
now
of
we
us
can't
know.
even make fun of penises? TikTok, you don't stop.
Well, the reason you can't make fun of penises now is because now we know it just contributes to this culture.
Well, if you have a smaller penis, sure, I would never. Well, first of all, if I knew someone had a smaller sized penis part, I would never make fun of them.
I know.
I would never actually call out someone that I knew to have a small
Of
penis.
course.
But I would call out someone who's compensating.
Of course. But then the problem is when other people with small penises, they're reading it and they're like laughing, ha ha. Oh, and then they get sad because the punchline is also something that they have. That's not a significant beef.
No, it wasn't, because I like her very much still. And I
Yeah.
think she likes me still.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
she just said she raised her concern, and I see it as valid.
I
Doesn't
wanna-
mean I won't still say guys in orange and yellow Lamborghinis aren't compensating, because I don't know how else to shame them.
It's just also that to me is funny that you think that. I mean, I know what most people think that about people driving fancy cars and crazy cars.
Not just fancy.
Flat, ostentatious cars.
Yeah, a car where really the sole objective of the car is to get attention with it. Like it's not mechanically superior to any other car.
Sure.
It's
But
just loud.
they are good cars like Ferraris, right?
Well, Lamborghini is a good car too.
Yeah.
It's just been hijacked by guys who need a lot of attention.
Sure.
I feel bad for Lamborghini, to be
Owners?
honest.
For the car company.
Yeah. I don't think any car manufacturers had more of its vehicles turned into like a mirror wrap or a camouflage wrap than their cars.
Oh.
And they can't like that. They're engineering those things, in Italy and Germany. And
Yeah, they don't
here there's one parked in front of a Gucci store in London with like,
You do see them all over Rodeo. Rodeo Drive.
And in front of Jerry's Deli.
In front of Jerry's Deli?
Yeah, and it's like the person's in their valet parking, but they have no intention of leaving that valet stand. They've got like all of a sudden, as soon as the car arrives, they've got so much business to tend to in their pockets, in the trunk, which is up front. And it's really just an excuse to stay in that spotlight as long as possible.
Oh, I see.
And so generally there's an inconvenience associated with it as well. And I should have compassion for these people who think the only thing that could be attractive about them is checking their wallet and trunk at the valet stand in front of Jerry's.
Yeah.
But I'm not there yet.
That's a masculine trope.
It is.
Nice car, nice
Sex
watch.
machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a nice watch.
And a nice
Isn't it
car.
funny? It's like I'm 90% to the person I hate. I'm 90% there, but
No.
I decided that the line I drew was the line.
Right, which everyone does.
Yes,
by the
I'm
way.
sure so many guys in LA look at me on my motorcycle at a stoplight and they're like, get over yourself, bud. We get it. You're a fucking renegade.
Yeah.
If they only knew how much pleasure I derive from it, and then I really don't I want to be invisible on it. I don't want any attention.
Yeah, that's true.
But who am I kidding? I wanted tons of attention. That's why I went into comedy and stand-up and the performing arts. I wanted all the attention.
And when you drive crazy,
that's for me.
I know it's for you, but you know that you're getting attention, right? When that
but
happens?
I'm going so fast they can't attribute the attention to me.
Okay, sure.
All right. And as you know, I do most of my stunt driving with a Nixon mask on.
Oh, sure.
Or a Jason from Friday the 13th.
But I mean crazy in like driving to the movie theater.
Can we just choose a different adjective?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, because crazy sounds reckless and out of control.
No, you're definitely not out of control.
No.
I'll say that.
But it's definitely violating some of the posted speed limits, some of the
lights,
some of the stop sign, the standard practice at a stop sign. Yeah. Yep.
Objectively, some people might call that reckless.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I do not think you're out of control, though.
It's not an ethical move of mine that I make. There's several things that I do that I know I'm violating some ethics. One is I consume all this factory farmed meat. I know that that's wrong.
Yeah.
I know it. And when I hit 95 on Los Feliz Boulevard, that's not cool.
No.
But if it's nice and empty, I think, who cares?
Who cares?
You know?
It's well, I also agree. Who cares? It's only if you're making other people feel unsafe.
Well, that's what Belle is good at reminding me of. It's not that you're endangering them because you're clearly in control, but it scares them. They get scared to get passed by somebody.
And it could endanger them not because of anything you're doing, but because they're not in very much control of their vehicle, and then they might freak out and try to adjust, and then they might crash.
Look up so quickly from the text message they were sending that they get vertigo.
Yeah, I had vertigo once.
I know you bring it up a lot.
I brought it up once earlier today. That's it. That's the first time you've ever heard me say that.
No, you said it yesterday on the couch as well.
No, today, this morning on the couch.
Oh my goodness. People are going to get the sense that we're on the couch all the time.
Well, we watch a lot of TV.
We do. Our hobby is watching TV.
We do. So,
is that unethical?
To watch TV?
Yeah, to be given this wonderful, glorious life in this crazy planet that's so beautiful, and to sit on a couch and stare at a square. Is that ethical?
If it brings you joy, no. And it's not harming others, so no.
Okay. You won me over.
Okay, great. Let's watch TV. Okay, Jonathan Haidt. Wait, I want to say one more thing before we get into it about penises.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It's so interesting because the thing about having a big dick is mainly for guys with guys.
100%. Just yes, and I make
Yeah, and it's. I don't know what you guys are saying to each other when you're talking about the size of your dick, but I think the implication is it's because women like it when it's bigger.
Well, I think ostensibly that's it, but it is very much an outward pecking order thing. It's a status. It's an alpha thing. It's who's biggest. You know, just like whoever's got the biggest muscles. We like the biggest of all things, guys.
But the underlying rationale is like it's better because it's more pleasure.
That's the lie we tell ourselves.
That's the lie.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Because really it's just about us.
Exactly.
But I would make the exact same argument to women who will complain about the unrealistic standard set for them by magazines and stuff.
Sure.
Guys don't even read those magazines. They don't know about those. Guys don't know supermodels as much as women know supermodels.
Sure, that's true.
And so that's all perpetuated as well between you guys.
Yeah. Girls for sure are
perpetuating the body image stuff.
Big time, yes.
And guys are perpetuating. Why are guys getting ripped?
Yeah.
As we found out, I found out the hard way, very few ladies care.
Yeah.
But the dudes all care. It's almost universal.
Yeah.
Now back to penises really quick.
Okay.
Also, some women do like bigger penises. I don't want to deny that. There are size queens. Some of our male gay friends are size queens, you know?
Yeah.
Of course, that works for males. They already are obsessed with it.
Right.
But surely some girls like bigger penises. But what's even funnier about that is generally when guys are comparing penises, they're not actually comparing girth. They're not like, oh, Mike's the girthiest.
Right.
And that's actually more to the point what women who like size like. But no guy's actually comparing girth.
Yeah.
And then this other, I think, thing that we all think, guys, is that women want you to pound them for an hour. And in my research,
is that what they think?
That's what guys think. Yeah, guys are mostly modeling after pornography, I believe.
Oh, sure. Actually, yeah.
And you think you're supposed to have like a baby arm and
that's
last.
That's why this is so dangerous.
But they think that a woman wants them to be jackhammering on them for an hour, and no lady wants that.
No.
It's it's a physically stressful.
It's a sensitive area. And that's a harsh thing to endure. Yeah,
for an hour.
Yeah.
But you hear guys like going, "I'm tantric."
Oh, but are they pounding?
Well, even if they're not pounding, if there's a reciprocal motion that's going on for 90 plus minutes.
Yeah.
I don't know if the ladies stoked your tantric at that point.
That's
but
true.
what do I know? I'm not tantric.
Okay, Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love Jonathan Haidt.
Mm-hmm.
One smart cookie.
Very smart. Very.
Very, very smart.
He said that vitamin C doesn't cure colds.
Okay.
Now, the most convincing evidence to date about colds and vitamin C comes from a 2013 review of 29 randomized trials with more than 11,000 participants. Researchers found that among extremely active people, such as marathon runners, skiers, and army troops doing heavy exercise in subarctic conditions, taking at least 200 milligrams of vitamin C every day appeared to cut the risk of getting a cold in half. But for the general population, taking daily vitamin C did not reduce the risk of getting a cold.
Yeah, to me, the explanation there sounds like heavy exertion depletes vitamin C. So if you're completely depleted, then it's going to impact your likelihood to get a cold. But your average person's carrying enough to deal with it.
Though it did say taking at least 200 milligrams of vitamin C per day did appear to reduce the duration of cold symptoms by an average of 8% in adults and 14% in children, which translated to about one less day of illness. That's kind of good.
Yeah.
One less day is better
Still,
than
8%'s not that.
No, it's
not very persuasive.
But one less
you
day
to change your habits.
Right. So, you said, and I quote, "My fear is that a lot of people think that if we remove the white male from these systems, that somehow the systems are going to work magically all of a sudden."
Uh-huh.
So, I just want to be clear. I mean, I obviously can't speak for every person, but most people having this argument are not saying remove all the white males.
I don't think they are.
Okay.
But I do think that some people, my wife included, we've had this debate, thinks it's a white male problem, and I think it's a majority problem.
You think?
I think
it's a
anything
system.
you're attributing to the white males, you could just as accurately say that's how the majority is. There's majority privilege in countries. There's, any group that occupies the majority in a company
Right.
or a country and a company will have the most amount of benefits likely.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just saying that when you say that as if like the left is saying that we're trying to remove all the white men, that's not what's being said. And it's saying more equality, more diversity, but not take everyone out and replace them with ethnic people.
Right.
That's not what people are saying. Just being clear.
Thanks for clarifying.
My Jewish friend was supposed to call me this morning to give me
The inside scoop on Judaism.
Mm-hmm. Because he said that it's widely believed around the world that the body is a temple, or at least susceptible to contaminants, and must be cleaned, especially if you're approaching God. And he said, you see in religions such as Islam and Judaism, where you have to like clean yourself, or that when a woman who is menstruating can't go near godly objects. And I was wondering, because I was like, I don't remember ever hearing that about Judaism. It is real in Hinduism. That's a real thing. And so I thought maybe he was just accidentally said Judaism instead of Hinduism. So I asked my Jewish friend,
right,
who's very knowledgeable,
up on all that.
Yes, because yes. And she said could be in like Orthodoxy. She said definitely not in Reformed, but she said it could be the case. She was going to ask her rabbi, and she didn't.
Oh my God, I thought you were going to say that, but he passed. The way you said, you went on such a low note that I was like, oh no, we lost him.
No, he's alive.
Well, kind of related.
Okay.
You really can't be around a bear when you're menstruating. I know that that's been a joke in a lot of movies, and I always thought it was just a joke. But when I was working with Bart the bear in New Zealand,
yeah,
of the many rules that were given to us, don't eat a dagwood around him or chicken wings. And they said if you're menstruating, don't come to set because Bart will smell the blood and then Bart will get activated. Yeah,
I'm not surprised.
I was like, well, Bart will get sexual.
Oh,
like he'll get horny. But no, he just blood gets his motor running. He gets hungry.
Sure, because it's almost like
an
animal just. Killed.
They smell blood when they smell blood because they eat carrion. They eat dead animals.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
So I don't know if that's, we're not park rangers, but I don't know if I was on my period. I don't know that I'd hike around bears.
Well, I'm not gonna.
Don't.
Well, first of all, I don't want to do that ever.
Hike around bears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
me either.
Also, but how do you know you can't if you're on your period and then you're walking down the street and you don't know if there's going to be a bear?
Oh, like a suburban bear?
Yeah.
Well, that you're not going to be able to avoid, but you can probably avoid going hiking on Kodiak Island.
That sucks.
If you're on your mens.
What if you're planning a spring break trip and you plan it to go to Yellowstone? Are there bears in Yellowstone? I think so.
Most importantly, if you've planned your spring break trip to Yellowstone,
speak for yourself. One time.
You're never going to get laid on spring break.
Oh, well, yeah, that's not everyone's goal. I went to Yellowstone on a spring break.
You did?
Well, we went skiing, but before that, we went to Yellowstone for a day.
Another ski trip.
It was not another, one of the 4 ski trips I went on.
Right, but you told me places in Colorado where Yellowstone is not.
Yeah, so we must have.
You must have been like in Jackson Hole.
No. Is it Yosemite?
Montana? Oh, Yosemite. Yeah, so you probably went to...
Maybe we went to Yosemite.
Okay. Yeah, so you then either went to Mammoth or Lake Tahoe to ski.
No, we didn't. I've never been to either of those places. I'll find out.
Yeah, call your Jewish friend and ask her.
She's not the one.
Oh,
but,
okay.
So I went to Yellowstone or Yosemite. Who can remember?
Let's give some backstory. Today I said, did you ever ski growing up? Because you grew up in Georgia. And you said, yeah, I used to ski on trips. And I said, well, where did you ski if you lived in Georgia? And you said, oh, Killington, Breckenridge, Val.
I did not say
Aspen.
Val. No.
And I was like, what a fucking brat. You skied at the only time you skied at the best places in the country.
Yes, I was I surround myself with experts on the field.
Affluent expert skiers.
Yes. And she they skied their whole life, and so they went to nice places. So I went to nice places.
Yeah.
We did not go to Vail or Aspen. Just so
Okay.
you know. Anywho, went to Yellowstone. But I'm saying if you're planning a spring break to a fancy ski resort, and the day before you decide to do a little small trip to Yellowstone, and then you have to cancel because you're accidentally on your period.
Well, no, you have to not go hiking, but also let's look into the hibernation schedule, because if you were on a ski trip, makes me think those bears are still snoozing. Maybe there's no problem.
Maybe, but it's just a lot of effort just because a
lot of ifs.
period. It's not fair.
No, it's a silly system.
It's real in Hinduism. You can't go if you're on your period. You can't go to the temple.
Right. You shouldn't.
Because
God is grossed out by
boring to
menstrual
go.
cycles. Okay. The God that invented the menstrual cycle
In that
is
case,
also
gods.
grossed out by it.
Right. You know, I went a couple times.
To the Hindu temple.
And I really didn't like going.
You didn't. Too many people?
Well, there were so many reasons why I didn't like going, obviously.
Yeah, it was
Mainly I was
triggering.
big time
Yeah.
triggering.
You were trying to be Elwood.
I was
And there you were,
trying
the
to be Elwood,
goddamn Hindu
trying to be
temple.
legally blonde. And here I was, the only white person amongst all these Indians at the temple. Yeah, it was uncomfortable. It was really uncomfortable for me. And it was far away. I didn't like the drive. I didn't speak any of the languages that the priests spoke. So they're saying something in a language and I don't know it.
Well, even a lot of the people there don't, right?
Yeah.
There's so
Well, I
many-
don't know. Some might.
Okay.
I don't know what the languages they were speaking.
Okay. Spanish, probably.
Anyway, and so I was just like pretending to pretending to pray. I mean, I guess I was praying, but I
That's
didn't know to
fine.
what. And then I just didn't.
But, I find that that's fine. I used to have a big chip on my shoulder about having to, either at an AA meeting back in Michigan, they want you to, bow your head and do some prayer.
We just did this at Thanksgiving.
And we did at Thanksgiving, and now I'm over it.
Yeah.
Thank God. I'm like, oh, who cares? I can close
Yeah.
my eyes and join everyone in this and
Yeah.
just share the moment and think about it more as all of us doing something that's unified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that.
I'm over it. But I did for a while. I was irritated by it.
Right. We had a beautiful Thanksgiving at
Mhm.
Ryan and Amy's.
Yeah.
And they hosted a bunch of us, 30 plus people, 50.
A Bacchanalia.
It was so wonderful and fun. And we did a prayer. And it just it took me back so quickly to so many instances when I was younger and I was at friends' houses and we had to do a prayer before dinner.
Say a little grace. Yeah.
Yes, and I was always I felt like such a fraud,
Yeah.
imposter.
Imposter.
But yeah, I don't care now, but it was just funny. It just reminded me of that. Anywho, I dealt with a lot.
I know. But here you are, a successful young
Here I
woman living in
am.
Los Angeles. It all
Yeah,
worked out.
Successful young white woman
Mhm.
living in
Just
LA.
living amongst the other white people.
Okay, so you're going to have to do some fast math. And I didn't do the math, so I can't check you.
Okay.
Okay? You said you thought 30% of people had polio at your grandparents' time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when is that?
Well, when my grandfather was a kid, he must have been born in 1920.
There's been a couple outbreaks.
Okay.
1916.
Okay, let's say that's when he was born.
Okay. On Saturday, June 17th, 1916, an official announcement of the existence of an epidemic polio infection was made in Brooklyn, New York. That year, there were over 27,000 cases
Okay.
and more than 6,000 deaths due to polio in the U.S., with over 2,000 deaths in New York City alone.
Mm.
Okay, so 27,000 cases.
Mm-hmm.
The population in 1916 was 101,961,000
Oh, in the U.S.
in the U.S.
But you just gave me the epidemic in New York.
No. 27,000 cases in the country.
Nationally?
Yeah. And then
And how many people?
2,000 deaths in New York.
Okay, that's extraneous information.
I was
I'm
just
throwing
giving
that
a-
out. If I was doing an
okay.
SAT thing. Did you say there's 100 million Americans?
101 million.
All right,
yeah.
so I'm throwing out that 1 million. I'm also
Okay.
rounding up to
Okay,
3.
sure.
So 30,000 would be 3% of a million. Is that right? 3,030. Yes, it would be 3% of a million. Oh, so this is like down in the 0.0003. Yeah.
Right. You
Ugh.
said 30.
God, was I
You
off.
were off. It's okay. Anywho. So.
Wow. That might be my biggest blunder to date. I mean, I'm off by a factor of like 10,000.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So Jonathan was talking about parents getting arrested for leaving their kids in the park. And he was like, I need to figure out when the first case was. So I did some research. The earliest case I could find that was like publicized on the news was 2014.
Okay.
It's not that long ago.
No, 4 years ago.
Only 4 short years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were saying it was much earlier than that. But anywho, 2014, a case of a South Carolina mother arrested for allegedly leaving her 9-year-old daughter at a park for hours while she worked at a nearby McDonald's. A park that was about a 6-minute walk from their home and about a 7-minute drive from where she worked. She could have gone home at any time. She has a key and she also has a cell phone, is what her mom said.
Ah, and she was arrested.
Yeah. But I think I don't remember if she won the case or not. So like some lawyer really jumped on this.
Yeah, to make a name for herself.
Right. It was that man. So not that long ago. It's a newer phenomenon.
Newer phenomenon.
Yeah, phenomenon. Okay. Oh, at the very end, you sort of referred to something we didn't go into with Jonathan, but you were like, I really like a lot of your experiments, like the one with the brother and the sister and the sleeping together, but then that's all you say.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that's my favorite thing I've ever gleaned from Jonathan Haidt at all, which is
challenged to think about that.
Well, yeah, the concept of moral dumbfounding. That's what it's called.
Right.
So
break it down, girl.
Okay. So the philosophical question at hand is, if a brother and sister go on spring break to Yellowstone or Yosemite and no one's on their period.
Was like south of France.
Okay, wherever. They go somewhere. And
I think south of France is relevant because somehow like no one will know. It's just more proof that no one will know.
It's just going away together. Yeah. And if you're camping in a tent, no one knows.
That's true.
So anyway, they're off together somewhere and they decide that they want to have sex.
On that trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One time, they just want to do it. And then the question is, he asked to his students, is that wrong?
Yeah.
And everyone says, yes, that's completely wrong.
Immoral.
He says why. And so they start giving reasons like, well, what if they have a baby and it's deformed? And,
right.
And he says, okay, so take away that factor.
They use a condom.
She's on birth control. It's not a factor.
Right.
Then they say, well, what if they fall in love or something?
Was that one of them?
I think so. There was like people would just.
The point is, they would
up,
endlessly bring up points that really weren't possible.
Yes, but
and really, it's just their stomach told them this was immoral, and then logically they just couldn't connect the dot. Right?
Yeah, so it's called moral dumbfounding, where you're just looking for reasons to corroborate your moral intuition.
Yeah, yes, support it.
There's no logic behind it.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
You know, I think when we played that game, I was like, it's fine.
Yeah, I said that too.
I of course would never have sex with my sister. I'd rather cut my head off my shoulders. But if someone else wanted to on a vacation in France, I actually can't tell you why it's wrong.
Yeah, I feel that way too, weirdly. Like I think they can.
And you have a sibling. It's not like we can't understand the repugnancy of coitus with a sibling.
Right. I mean, yeah.
Right. There's nothing fouler.
No, there isn't.
But I don't think you can make a moral argument against it. It's just two human beings on planet Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And no one's getting harmed.
And you could go like, well, this is going to lead to blank, but that's not a part of the thing. No, this is a one-off.
It's a one-off.
It's not going to lead to anything.
Yeah. What would it lead to? What are they saying?
You're just evaluating the event itself.
Oh, you're saying it could lead to like everyone starts marrying
they go home and it turns into something. Well, no, that's not part of it. It doesn't turn into something in this.
But
scenario.
okay, so okay. But if it did
turn into something.
If they fell in love, let's say.
Yeah. Ooh, it's so grody.
I know.
Keep going.
It is grody. But what if they fell in love, but they decided we won't have children because
Right.
we know this would not.
He gets a vasectomy on the flight home.
Is that immoral?
I mean, no. I mean,
it's
It's
obviously
gross.
bizarre.
It's bizarre and gross. But
it's
there's no ramifications of it. Like
it's only gross because you're picturing your own sister and you know that would not
work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's not gross if you just.
But here's what it boils down to me is there's zero victim.
I know
Nobody's
no one's
being
getting
hurt.
harmed. Yeah.
These two people somehow are deriving pleasure
Joy.
and fulfillment out of this, and no one's getting hurt.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you could argue the parents are probably very bummed out.
Okay, let's say they're deceased.
Okay, they're out. Great addendum. Yeah, and they moved to a town where no one knows of their brother and sister. Then none the wiser.
No. I think it's okay. People. So the only people getting quote harmed would be them because of a social stigma.
Yeah.
But that's the whole thing that we're saying.
I have friends with siblings, and I would not want to be around them like playing kissy face with their sibling. It would, it would ruin my enjoyment of whatever activity we were doing. I just wouldn't be able to get past it. Now you can say that's my issue.
That is your issue.
But I'm going to own the issue. There's no way I could, watch my best friend Aaron Weekly and his sister Jenny on a double date with me and Kristen. It would just be, I couldn't enjoy it. So they'd be harming my trip.
Well, they're not. They're not harming anything.
Baskin Robbins or whatever.
You're just a little sensitive.
Yeah. I'm old fashioned that way. I don't like when brothers and sisters are kissing in front of me.
See, you sound like all these people.
Well, no, I don't like it. But that doesn't mean it's moral or immoral.
I'm fine with it.
Yeah. You would hang out with one of your friends if they were dating their brother?
If you were dating Carly.
Oh, my God. I mean, even you saying that sentence, I almost lost consciousness. Yes. I mean, oh, my God. Yeah, okay. You're trying to say that you could handle being around me and Carly as a couple? You could.
Yes, I could.
No.
I would be like, it would take a second to adjust.
Oh.
But I would. If you were in love, I mean, what could I possibly have a problem
love
with
is
that?
love.
For real. I feel that way for real.
For real.
For real.
Yeah. That someone who's appalled by this will say, then what about bestiality? But then again, I think the animal's a victim.
That's also not fair. Yeah, the animal isn't reciprocating anything.
The animal doesn't want to have sex with a human.
They're not.
Except for a dolphin. If a girl was dating a dolphin, I'd be very pleased for them.
No.
Wouldn't you?
No.
If a girl loved a dolphin and they had a real connection and they both enjoyed having sex, who cares?
No.
Because there's all these stories of dolphins having sex with or attempting to have sex with scuba divers. Yeah.
But I think
they think they're playing with a dolphin and then they like turn around and then that penis is out.
Oh.
Yeah. God. That could really spook you.
Yeah, they're kind of rapey.
Yeah,
dolphins.
That's what I've heard is they're rapey.
Me too.
But again, so if the dolphin and the beautiful woman were in love,
how could they be in love? This is getting out of control.
Why?
How could that dolphin isn't reciprocating any emotional anything for that person?
No, when she looks into the dolphin's eyes, she feels whole.
So do you think you can be in love with a corpse?
Ooh, now that's a great one. That's even more on point. So what's wrong with necrophilia? Because the person's deceased. They're not suffering.
They're not suffering, yeah.
I mean, the person who's having sex with the corpse is clearly suffering, but I guess it's their choice to suffer.
Oh, well, see, the reason this gets... Because clearly that person is not psychologically well. So to allow it...
I would argue that someone who wants to make love to their sister is not psychologically
correct
well.
In all of these circumstances.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
That they're probably not healthy. So to allow it is to perpetuate some really, really mentally unhealthy behavior for those people. It's bad for them.
Yeah. It's just, do we live in a country where we protect people from themselves? We let them eat however they'd like. We let them smoke cigarettes and drink alcohol.
Yeah.
We generally say no. you know,
people
if
can
you're
do.
hurting yourself, that's up to you.
I know, but
Okay.
interesting.
Did he say anything else? You shut your computer.
I'm done with my fact check.
Oh, you are? Because you've quit or you are out? Who knows?
DVD. No, I finished.
Oh, okay.
All right, that's it.
All right. I love you.
I love
That
you.
was fun.
Yeah.
I like talking to folks like that really demand that we rise to the challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Merry Christmas. We're getting closer, and you know how I feel about the holiday.
Love it.
I also want to add that we're juggling a couple ideas. We can't agree on them, but I definitely want to have a Christmas
We
spectacular.
are. Well, we're going to have some Christmassy stuff happen in our last episode of the year.
Right, on Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve.
And I want there to be sleigh bells. I want to bring in some singers. I'm going to dress up, I don't know, either as Saint Nick or Elf or who knows,
Sure.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Yep.
And try to really launch
And
us
we're going to light a menorah.
And we'll probably throw some Kwanzaa decorations up and try
Sure.
to make it all very inclusive.
Yeah. Diverse holiday spectacular.
It'll just be all of us white people, you the whitest among them.
Yep.
And we will celebrate all the diversity in the world. So I love you and Merry Christmas.
And Merry Christmas.